So I want you to imagine a hospital for a second. Every single operating room is booked. I mean, booked solid 100% of the time.
Right, zero downtime.
Exactly. The schedules are packed tight, the staff is fully utilized, and, by all traditional business metrics, you're looking at a massive success.
Oh yeah, it sounds like the absolute peak of like MBA-style efficiency.
Right. But here is the crazy part. That exact scenario caused a complete catastrophic operational collapse at St. John's Regional Health Center in Missouri.
A total disaster.
Yeah, and I want you to keep that paradox in mind today, because it's basically the key to understanding this massive invisible force in our lives. So think back to the last time you felt impossibly rushed.
We've all been there.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe you were staring down a project deadline that was just, hours away.
Yeah.
Or maybe you were looking at your bank account a few days before payday and you realized you were just completely strapped for cash.
It's a very specific feeling.
It really is. Remember how that feeling seemed to physically hijack your brain?
Well, yeah, because it actually alters your baseline reality. Like, when you are in that state, your physiological responses change. Your focus narrows entirely on the threat.
Yeah.
And trying to process anything outside of that immediate crisis feels like wading through wet concrete.
And the thing is, usually we internalize that failure, right?
Yeah.
Like we tell ourselves, oh, I need to get better at time management, or I just lack financial discipline.
We blame ourselves.
Exactly. But for this deep dive, we are pulling from a really fascinating stack of sources to look at a totally different explanation. We've got the behavioral economics of scarcity and poor economics, plus the structural frameworks of thinking and systems and good strategy, bad strategy.
It's a great lineup.
It really is. And our mission today is to show you that scarcity isn't just about, not having enough of something. Scarcity is a condition that fundamentally captures the mind.
It creates a psychological trap.
Yes. A trap that blinds us to the systemic leverage points that could actually solve our problems. And that applies whether you're a single parent trying to make rent or a CEO running a Fortune 500 company.
Right, because we constantly look at bad decisions and attribute them to a flawed personality or, poor leadership.
Totally.
But if we dig into the sources, we uncover this invisible architecture of scarcity, and it literally forces human beings into a state of cognitive tunneling. And once you're in that tunnel...
You're just flying blind?
Basically, yeah. You're flying blind to the bigger picture. So we're going to look at the actual mechanics behind that hijacked feeling.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to start, we need to redefine what scarcity actually is.
Right.
The sources make a fairly radical claim here. They argue that scarcity is not a physical constraint, but it's actually a mindset.
Right.
So how does lacking $20 or lacking 2 hours physically change how our brains work?
Well, the mechanism they talk about is what researchers call a bandwidth tax.
Bandwidth tax.
Bandwidth tax,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, so it helps to think of your brain like a computer processor. You only have a finite amount of RAM, right? That's your working memory and executive control.
So it's limited.
Exactly. And when you are experiencing a state of scarcity, your brain starts running these incredibly heavy background programs about what you lack.
Oh, wow. So they're just running in the background constantly.
Just draining your battery. You sit down to write an email, but like 40% of your cognitive capacity is actively worrying about that unpaid electric bill. Or, stressing about the ticking clock on a project.
So you literally have less cognitive capacity left over to pay attention to your environment.
Exactly. To weigh complex decisions or even to resist immediate temptations.
It almost sounds like a temporary drop in IQ. You haven't suddenly become less intelligent, but a huge chunk of your intelligence is currently occupied with managing a crisis.
Leaving you with very little processing power for whatever is right in front of you, that is a highly accurate way to frame it.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the sources detail how this bandwidth tax creates a fascinating dual effect. So the first part is what they call the focus dividend.
Wait, dividend, so it's a good thing?
In the short term, yes. Because your mind is heavily captured by the scarcity, you actually get incredibly sharp and productive at managing the immediate threat.
Oh, right. Like if a deadline is 60 minutes away, you aren't scrolling through social media.
Exactly. Your brain shuts out the noise and you focus entirely on the work. But, and this is the big but, this dividend is a double-edged sword.
Because it comes with a tax.
Right. It comes with a massive cost, known as the tunneling tax.
Meaning you get so focused on the target that you lose your peripheral vision entirely.
It is an active inhibition of anything outside the immediate problem. The sources use this really visceral analogy, which I love. Imagine a firefighter rushing to a 5-alarm blaze.
Okay.
The firefighter is hyper-focused on getting the truck to the fire as quickly as possible. That is the focus dividend.
They are locked in.
Right. But because they are tunneling so intensely on the destination, they might completely forget to buckle their seatbelt.
Oh, wow. Because the seatbelt falls outside the tunnel.
Precisely.
Right,
Or
yeah.
consider an air traffic controller fixating on one single airplane that reported a broken engine.
They're intensely focused on saving that one plane.
Yeah, brilliantly focused. But in doing so, they might neglect the other 30 planes in their airspace. They can put them all on a collision course.
Man, I was reading the suitcase analogy in the sources, and it really clicked for me on a practical level.
Oh, that's a great one.
Right. So imagine you are going on a trip and you have a massive, oversized suitcase. That represents abundance.
You've got plenty of room.
Exactly. When you pack loosely. You throw in an extra pair of shoes, a heavy winter jacket just in case, maybe a stack of books you probably won't even read.
Because you can. You have tons of space left over.
You have what the sources call slack. But when you are forced to pack a tiny carry-on, basically, when you are operating under scarcity, every single item requires a painful trade-off.
Right. If I bring the sweater, I have to leave the shoes.
Exactly. There is zero slack. So doesn't this mean that tunneling fundamentally changes how we make choices? Like making us automatically biased toward borrowing against our future?
What's fascinating here is that inside the tunnel, a quick fix looks incredibly attractive.
Because it solves the immediate crisis.
Exactly. The crisis of packing the tiny suitcase today. If you are experiencing intense time scarcity, pulling an all-nighter or putting off a crucial dental appointment seems like a great idea.
Because it instantly relieves the pressure of the deadline.
Right. Or if you're experiencing money scarcity, taking out a high-interest payday loan solves the immediate crisis of making rent.
But the long-term cost of those actions are just devastating. I mean, the exhaustion from the all-nighter, the eventual root canal because you skipped the dentist, the crippling interest payments next month. Are we really just ignoring those consequences?
Well, it actually goes deeper than ignoring them. They remain totally invisible because they fall completely outside the tunnel.
You literally don't see them.
You literally lack the cognitive bandwidth to weigh those future costs. Your biological system is dedicating all of its resources to surviving today.
So the bandwidth tax changes the actual math of your decision-making.
Yes. It generates a scarcity trap where your desperate attempts to manage the immediate lack actually manufacture more lack in the future.
You know, we see this survival mechanism play out in the most extreme ways in the informal markets of South Asia.
Right, moving to the real-world examples.
Yeah, we are pulling from the field work in poor economics and scarcity here. And they look specifically at fruit and vegetable vendors in Chennai.
It's a really eye-opening case study.
It is. Picture this. These are vendors, mostly women, who are waking up long before dawn. They pay a daily fee to rent a wooden pushcart.
Just to have a cart for the day.
Right. Then they buy their entire stock of tomatoes and onions in the morning on credit from a wholesaler. And then they walk the streets in the blazing heat all day long just to make enough margin to pay back that wholesaler at night and maybe buy a small amount of food for their families.
It is an incredibly grueling, relentless cycle. And examining their daily lives brings us to a major puzzle in development economics.
Right, the microfinance puzzle.
Yes. In these specific areas, microfinance institutions, or MFIs, operate quite widely. These are organizations offering small loans at around a 25% annual interest rate.
Which, I mean, is relatively reasonable for lending without collateral.
Exactly. Yet, field researchers found that many of these extremely poor vendors actively choose to bypass those microfinance loans.
Which is wild.
Right. And instead, they borrow from local informal money lenders. These might be the local lenders who use daily aggressive collection methods, or the Kabuliwalas, which are men originally from Kabul, historically known for lending in the region.
And the rates they charge are insane, right?
Exorbitant, frequently 70% a year or even much, much higher.
Looking at that purely on paper, it just seems absurd. I mean, why would anyone voluntarily choose a 70% interest rate over a 25% interest rate?
It doesn't seem to make sense.
The knee-jerk reaction from a lot of traditional economists or, distant policymakers is to assume a complete lack of financial literacy. They look at the data and say, well, they just don't understand compound interest, or they were short-sighted.
Yeah, that's a common assumption.
But if we apply the tunneling concept, The reality is much more systemic, isn't it?
The financial illiteracy argument completely misses the mark. These vendors are actually financial experts at survival.
Right, they have to be.
The issue is that they live with absolute zero slack in their daily budgets. Every single rupee is spoken for just to keep their families alive. But, life is unpredictable.
Sudden shocks always hit.
Always. A child gets sick and needs medicine, or a torrential downpour ruins their entire cart of vegetables. Or maybe a cultural obligation like a mandatory wedding gift comes up.
And when that shock hits, they're instantly forced deep into the tunnel.
Yes. A fast, easy loan from a local moneylender solves today's emergency right now.
Wow. Even though the microfinance institution might have a cheaper rate.
Right, because the cheaper rate often requires filling out paperwork, waiting 2 weeks for approval, or joining a community lending group.
And if you need medicine for your kid today, a 2-week wait might as well be 100 years.
Exactly.
So the 70% loan is right in front of them, instantly solving the crisis inside the tunnel.
Precisely the point. They take the expensive loan to survive the day, but that triggers a dangerous mechanical phenomenon called juggling.
Juggling. Because they took on this high-interest debt, they now have even less slack in their budget tomorrow.
Yes, a massive chunk of their daily profit now goes just to servicing the interest. So when the next minor shock hits, they have to borrow again just to pay off the previous debt.
So they're constantly juggling.
Just trying to catch whichever ball is closest to hitting the ground, they are permanently forced to be one step behind.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. A common critique is that these vendors don't invest in their future. People wonder, why don't they just save up $30 over a few months to buy their own push cart?
Right. If they owned the cart, they wouldn't have to pay a daily rental fee.
And their take-home pay would instantly increase.
Yeah.
But if their whole reality is just juggling today's emergency, how do they even begin to look at tomorrow? Aren't they basically trapped by their own local expertise?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it requires understanding what economists call the S-shape curve of wealth creation.
Okay, the S curve.
Yeah, think of it like trying to push a heavy, massive boulder out of a deep ditch. If you only have enough physical energy to push the boulder halfway up the slope, you eventually have to let go to sleep.
And the boulder just rolls all the way back down to the bottom of the ditch every single night.
Exactly. You are expending massive amounts of effort every day, but your position never changes. The bottom of the curve is entirely flat.
Oh, man.
You have to save and invest enough energy all at once to push that boulder completely over the lip of the hump of the S to start seeing momentum and compounding returns.
So that $30 for the push cart is the lip of the ditch.
Yes. But the immediate flattening of returns at the bottom keeps these vendors trapped. Because they are constantly juggling exorbitant interest rates and daily shocks, their cognitive bandwidth is maxed out.
They're entirely in firefighting mode.
They literally do not have the working memory left over to step back, put the balls down, and formulate a complex multi-month plan to accumulate that $30.
Wow.
The tunneling tax is not a personality trait. It is a direct biological product of their environment. If you took a wealthy, highly educated executive and stripped them of all their resources, placing them in that vendor's exact circumstances.
Their bandwidth would be taxed in the exact same way.
Exactly. They would likely make the exact same decisions.
Which bridges us perfectly to the other end of the spectrum. I mean, when we lay out the mechanics of that S curve, it makes the vendor's decisions look completely rational given their environment.
Yes, very rational.
But if this is truly a physiological response, like a tax on our working memory, then it shouldn't just be limited to financial poverty. Right?
Not at all.
Someone with millions of dollars in the bank could still fall into this exact same trap if they're starved for time or resources at work.
Systems behave like systems, regardless of the tax bracket or the job title of the people operating inside them. The cognitive bandwidth tax hits a corporate boardroom the exact same way it hits a street market.
Okay, let's go back to that example from the very beginning of the deep dive. St. John's Regional Health Center.
The hospital with the operating rooms.
Right. They had this acute problem with their 32 operating rooms. They were running those rooms at 100% capacity. Every slot booked, doctors working constantly, maximizing every square foot of real estate.
And from a purely financial spreadsheet perspective, that looks like zero waste. It looks like perfect management.
But because there was absolutely no slack in the system, it was an operational disaster. I mean, in medicine, emergencies are inevitable, right?
Of course.
So an emergency case would come in, which accounted for about 20% of their overall load.
Yeah.
And because there were no empty rooms, it had to bump a scheduled surgery,
And then that surgery bumped the next one.
creating a massive cascade failure throughout the entire hospital. You had patients who would be fasting all day, waiting hours in the hallway. Surgeons and nursing staff were being forced into unplanned, exhausting overtime.
Performing routine surgeries at 2 in the morning.
Yeah, the medical error rate risks skyrocketed. The entire organization was trapped in the exact same tunnel as the Chennai fruit vendor,
They were entirely in firefighting mode.
constantly juggling patients, perpetually one step behind. So how do you even fix that?
Well, to understand why it is so incredibly difficult for leaders to fix a situation like that, we have to apply the insights from Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows.
A great book.
Oh, it's foundational.
Yeah.
When a complex system is failing, the people inside it desperately want to fix it. But to actually solve systemic issues, you have to find what Meadows calls leverage points.
Leverage points, okay.
These are specific places in a complex system where a small, targeted shift in one thing can produce massive, fundamental changes in everything else.
It's sort of like Buckminster Fuller's concept of the trim tab. I love this visual from the sources.
Oh, yeah. Explain that one.
So the trim tab is a tiny rudder attached to the trailing edge of a massive ship's main rudder. It takes almost no effort or energy to turn the tiny trim tab, but turning it creates a low-pressure zone in the water that pulls the massive main rudder around, which then turns the entire giant ship.
It's a tiny, effortless intervention that yields massive directional leverage.
Exactly. But there is a major catch with leverage points in human systems, isn't there?
Yes, they're deeply counterintuitive. Meadows points out that people intimately involved in a failing system often intuitively know exactly where the leverage point is, but they push it in the exact wrong direction.
Wait, really? Why?
And the reason they push in the wrong direction brings us right back to the bandwidth tax.
Oh, because they are stuck in the tunnel.
Exactly. When a hospital administrator or a CEO is tunneling, when they are hypervigilant, exhausted from juggling, and operating an organization with zero slack, they cannot see the trim tab.
They could only see the immediate fire.
Right. So if surgeries are backed up and staff are working at 2 in the morning, the panicked tunneling response is to mandate work harder, add more hours, schedule even tighter to catch up,
Which, of course, just eliminates whatever microscopic slack was left.
making the system even more fragile and prone to collapse.
So what was the actual trim tab at St. John's?
The actual trim tab was to intentionally leave some operating rooms empty, dedicated only to emergencies.
Wow.
It feels completely counterintuitive to leave an expensive room empty to increase throughput, but it stopped the cascade failures.
We see this exact dynamic manifest daily across the corporate world, too. Like, take software engineering.
Oh, definitely.
A team is working under a brutal, time-scarce deadline. They hit a bug in the code. The proper systemic leverage point would be to step back, analyze the architecture, and rewrite the faulty foundational code.
But they are deep in the tunnel.
Right, so instead they write a quick patch. Inside the tunnel, the patch is a flawless solution because it gets the product out the door today.
But outside the tunnel.
Outside the tunnel, that patch interacts poorly with other code, creating massive technical debt. 6 months later, adding a simple new feature takes twice as long because the foundation is a fragile mess of patches.
They borrowed against their future. And we see this cognitive failure at the absolute highest levels of executive leadership, too.
Yeah, Richard Rumelt's analysis in Good Strategy, Bad Strategy gets into this.
Yes. Crafting a coherent strategy requires making painful choices. It requires looking a vice president in the eye and saying, no, we are cutting funding for your pet project to focus on this other initiative.
Which requires a massive amount of executive function and emotional bandwidth to endure that social friction.
Right. So what happens when the CEO is bandwidth taxed?
They compromise.
Exactly. Because they are stretched thin and lack the working memory to evaluate complex trade-offs, they accommodate all the conflicting interests.
And try to do everything.
They generate what Rumelt calls laundry lists of desirable goals. You know, grow revenue, cut costs, expand to Europe, improve morale.
Instead of formulating a single, focused, hard-hitting policy.
Right. And the organization ends up juggling 100 priorities and succeeding at none of them.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, or for a CEO? When we zoom out and look at all of this, whether you are managing a household budget, leading a software team, or running the C-suite of a hospital, it sounds to me like the absolute biggest mistake a leader can make isn't picking the wrong marketing strategy or the wrong product.
No, it's something much more fundamental.
The most fatal mistake is designing an organization that operates at 100% efficiency. Because if you ruthlessly eliminate all slack in the name of maximizing output, you completely eliminate the cognitive bandwidth required to actually step back, look at the horizon, and steer the ship.
This raises an important question, though, because that is the ultimate paradox of efficiency. You have to actively cultivate bandwidth, not just maximize hours worked.
You have to intentionally build slack into the system.
And crucially, you have to recognize that when you are already in the tunnel, your brain will lie to you. You cannot rely on willpower to get out. You need interventions from the outside.
Like what?
The sources highlight this brilliant, simple example of a foundation president who constantly scheduled his meetings back to back. He was chronically time scarce, constantly tunneling, always running late.
And making rushed, terrible decisions because he was just juggling the next meeting.
He was basically the corporate version of the street vendor paying 70% interest.
Completely.
So he implemented a structural system. He had his assistant physically open the door and interrupt the meeting 10 minutes before it was supposed to end, and then interrupt again at the exact end time.
Okay, that seems almost too basic to be profound.
It is basic, but it acts as a cognitive rumble strip.
Oh, like on a highway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about those grooved lines on the shoulder of a highway. If you fall asleep at the wheel and drift out of your lane, the loud vibration of the rumble strip jolts you awake.
So the assistant's knock forces the executive's brain out of the tunnel.
It breaks the trance of the immediate conversation and forces him to look at the bigger picture of his schedule. He recognized he did not have the internal bandwidth to manage his time when he was tunneling, so he externalized the discipline.
He built a system to protect himself from his own scarcity mindset.
Precisely.
Okay, we have covered some incredibly deep terrain today. Let's pull this all together. What we've discovered is that scarcity isn't just a physical lack of resources. It's not just missing time, money, or staff.
It is a biological, physiological tax on our working memory.
Right. It captures our minds, forces us into a tunnel, and makes us prioritize immediate survival over long-term stability. It causes us to borrow heavily against our future, whether by taking a ruinous 70% loan, applying a sloppy software patch, or demanding our exhausted hospital staff work harder.
And worst of all, it blinds us to the trim tabs.
The counterintuitive leverage points that could actually solve the root problem.
It really is a universal operating system of the human brain. But I want to leave you with one final thought drawn from the sources to really mull over, because it completely flips how we usually approach this entire issue.
Okay, what is it?
We constantly view scarcity as the enemy, right? We think the crisis itself is the problem. But if you look closely at the timelines of these failures, abundance is actually what sets the stage for scarcity.
Wait, really? How does having abundance create a scarcity trap?
Think about the mechanics of human behavior. It is the squandering of time in the first 3 weeks of a monthly project when time feels abundant that creates the frantic, tunneling deadline panic in week 4.
Oh,
It is the failure to save money and build a cash buffer during an economic boom that leaves a family or a business completely vulnerable to the juggling trap when a recession eventually hits.
it's like you pack the massive suitcase terribly because you think you have infinite room, and then you're surprised when nothing fits.
Exactly. When we have slack, we tend to waste it, and that squandered abundance becomes tomorrow's scarcity. If that is true, then the ultimate leverage point isn't trying to fight scarcity when you are already in the tunnel.
Because by then, your brain is already hijacked. It's too late.
Right. The real leverage point is looking at your life right now and asking, how can you use your moments of abundance to design rumble strips? How can you build systems, financial buffers, and hard boundary lines today that will protect you from your own mind when the tunnel eventually, inevitably, closes in?
You have to build the life raft while the sun is shining, because you simply won't have the cognitive bandwidth to do it once the storm hits.
Exactly.
Next time you feel that frantic rush, that hijacked brain, remember you aren't broken, you're just in the tunnel. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive, and as always, keep questioning the systems around you.